All right, you guys, here we go with the chapter called Bookkeeping. This chapter is kind of crazy. Some stuff happens. We're in London in 1900, so this is actually in Chandrash's home. This chapter takes place 1 year after the anniversary party that we just read a few chapters ago. Okay, so Chandrash is wandering around in his home. I want you to pay attention to his behavior at the beginning of the chapter. His behavior is rather weird, and you have a question in your packet about it. Chandrash Christoph Lefauve sits at the huge mahogany desk in his study, a mostly empty bottle of brandy in front of him. At one point in the evening there was a glass, but he misplaced that hours ago. Wandering from room to room has become a nightly habit, fueled by insomnia and boredom. He is also missing his jacket, abandoned in a previously wandered through room. It will be retrieved without remark by a diplomatic maid in the morning. In the study, between bottle sips of brandy, he attempts to work. This mainly consists of scribbling with fountain pens on various scraps of paper. He has not genuinely worked in years. No new ideas, no new productions. The cycle of mounting and executing and moving on to the next project has skidded to a halt, and he cannot say why. Okay, before the circus even existed, Chandrash was like a brilliant mind in the world of entertainment and production. Remember when we very first met him, he was throwing his dagger at a newspaper clipping that was saying that he was nearly transcendent or something like that. Almost transcendent, I think it was. Anyways, what we see now, like 10 years later, is that Chandrash is having trouble. Like, he might think of an idea, he might scratch it down on paper, but then before he knows it, he's forgotten about it. He is not able to, like, concentrate on an idea for long enough to ever go anywhere with his ideas, and it's very troubling to him. He spends most of his time wandering around his own home late at night, drinking brandy straight from the bottle. He's always drunk. He can't remember anything. It's a mess. Chandrash is a mess at this point in the story. And just like that paragraph ended, it says, and he cannot say why. Okay, we know that Marco has had to kind of like, I don't want to say tamper with his memory, but kind of tamper with his memory, right? Because he doesn't want Chandrash to know about certain parts of the circus. He's trying to protect him mostly, but it's having some bad effects on Chandrash as a person. It does not make sense to him, not this night or any other, not at any level of the brandy bottle. This is not how it's supposed to work. A project is started, it is developed and mounted and sent out into the world, and more often than not, it becomes self-sufficient, and then he is no longer needed. It is not always a pleasant position to be in, but is the way of such things, and Chandrash knows this process well. One is proud, one collects one's receipts, and even if one is a bit melancholy, one moves on. The circus left him behind, sailing forth, and yet he cannot turn away from the shore. More than enough time to mourn the creative process and ignite it again, but there are no sparks of something new, no new endeavors, nothing bigger, better for nearly 14 years. Perhaps he thinks he has outdone even himself, but it is not a pleasant thought. So he drowns it in brandy and attempts to ignore it. Okay, so he's saying, like, what if the circus was my best work and I'll never top it? And that is also a depressing thought for him. The circus bothers him. It bothers him most at times like this, in the bottom of the brandy bottle and the quiet of the night. It is not terribly late. The night is fairly young in circus terms, but the silence is already heavy. And now, with his bottle and his fountain pen drained, he simply sits, dragging a hand through his hair distractedly, staring across the room at nothing in particular. Flames burn low in the gilded fireplace. The tall bookcases stuffed with curios and relics loom in the shadows. His wandering eyes drift over the open doorway and settle on the door across the hall, the door to Marco's office, tucked discreetly between a pair of Persian columns. Part of a suite of rooms that are Marco's own, the better to keep him at the beck and call, though he is out for the evening. Okay, so Chandresh is sitting there. He's drunk. He's just like, he doesn't know what to do next. And then somehow his eyes happen to light on Marco's office, and he starts to think about some things. Chandrash wanders through an alcohol-soaked fog if perhaps Marco keeps the circus documents in his office, and what exactly those documents might contain. He's only seen the paperwork involved with the circus in passing, hasn't bothered to scrutinize the detail of the things in years, and now he's curious. Okay, so he's like, I wonder if the details from the circus are in there. I haven't seen those in a while. Empty brandy bottle still in hand, he pulls himself to his feet and stumbles out into the hallway. It will be locked, he thinks, when he reaches the polished dark wood door, but the silver handle moves easily as he turns it. The door swings open. Chandrash hesitates in the doorway. The tiny office is dark, save for the pool of light spilling in from the hall and the dim haze from the street lamp seeping in through the single window. For a moment Chandrash reconsiders. If there were any brandy left in the bottle, he might close the door and wander away, but the bottle is empty, and it is his own house after all. He fumbles for the switch on the sconce nearest the door, and it flickers to life, illuminating the room in front of him. The office is packed with too much furniture. Cabinets and trunks line the walls. Boxes of files are stacked in tidy rows. The desk in the center that takes up nearly half the space is a smaller, more modest version of the one in the study, though its surface holds jars of ink and pens and a pile of notebooks, all in perfect order and not lost in a clutter of figurines and precious stones and antique weaponry. Chandrash puts the empty brandy bottle down on the desk and begins searching the cabinets and files, opening drawers and flipping through papers without any clear idea of what it is exactly he is looking for. There does not seem to be a particular section for the circus. Bits of it are mixed in with books of theater receipts and lists of box office returns. He is mildly surprised that there is no discernible filing system, no labels on boxes. The contents of the office are orderly but not clearly organized. In a cabinet, finds piles of blueprints and sketches. Many bear Mr. Barris's stamps and initials, but there are other diagrams written in different hands that Chandrash does not recognize. In some cases, he cannot even distinguish what language they are inscribed in, though each has Les Cirques de Rêve written carefully along the edge of the paper. Pulling them closer to the light, spreading them out over what little available floor space he can find, he scrutinizes them, sheet after sheet, letting them roll and fall in piles as he moves on to each subsequent piece. Okay, so he finds what appears to be blueprints, but he can see that also like other things have been drawn over Mr. Barris's original blueprints. And at this point, okay, we might be thinking, Chandrash, knock it off. You're gonna get like Marco is gonna know he was in there because Chandrash is drunk and he's not being careful with anything. You know, he's pulled all the blueprints down. He's got them spread across the floor in some random order. Like he will never be able to put it back the way that it was before he started snooping. So this isn't the greatest idea. Pulling them closer to the light, oh no, I did that, sorry. Even the prints that are clearly Mr. Barris's work have been written over. Additions made in different handwriting, layers placed on top of original designs. Leaving the papers on the floor, Chandrash returns to the desk, to the neat pile of notebooks next to the abandoned brandy bottle. They appear to be bank ledgers, rows upon rows of numbers and calculations, with notations and totals and dates. Chandrash tosses these aside. He turns his attention to the desk itself. He begins pulling open the heavy wooden drawers. Several are empty. One contains dozens of blank notebooks and unopened jars of ink. Another is full of old date books, the appointments filling the days written in some sort of shorthand in Marco's neat, delicate handwriting. The last drawer is locked. Chandrash makes to turn to another box of files nearby, but something pulls him back to the locked drawer. There is no key in the desk. There are no locks on the other drawers. He cannot recall if there was a lock on the desk when it was placed here years ago when the office contained only the desk and a single cabinet and seemed almost spacious. After a few minutes of looking for a key, he grows impatient and returns to his study to retrieve the silver knife that is embedded in the dartboard on the wall. Lying on the floor behind the desk, he all but destroys the lock in his attempts to pry the mechanism open, but he is rewarded with the satisfying click of the latch as it relents to the blade. So eventually he goes back into his game room and he gets a knife. He comes back and he just like hacks at the lock on the drawer until he finally gets it open. Again, there's no putting this back. Like once it's done, and he is caught. But the drawer opens, and so he's going to pull something out. Leaving the knife on the floor, he pulls open the drawer and finds only a book. It is a large leather-bound volume. Chandrash takes it from the drawer, startled by the weight of it, and drops it with a thump onto the desk. The book is old and dusty. The leather is worn. The binding is fraying at the edges. Hesitating only a moment, Chandrash lifts the cover. The end papers are covered in an exquisitely detailed drawing of a tree, covered in symbols and markings. It is densely inscribed, more ink than blank page. Chandrash cannot decipher any of it, cannot even tell if the marks are broken into words or continuous strings of motifs. Here and there he spots a mark that looks familiar. Some are almost numbers. Some recall the shape of Egyptian hieroglyphs. It reminds him of the contortionist's tattoo. The pages of the book are covered with small similar markings, though predominantly they hold other things, bits of paper culled from other documents. It takes Chandrash several pages to realize each bit of paper holds a signature. It takes longer for him to realize that he knows the names. Only when he finds the page with the matching childish scrawl spelling out the names of the Murray twins is he certain that the book contains the names of each and every person involved with the circus. And only upon closer scrutiny does he notice that they are accompanied by locks of hair. The later pages hold the names of the original conspirators, though one name is conspicuously absent and another has been removed. Okay. Whose name do you think would have been removed at this point? Who have we lost who was originally a part of the crew? You know what I mean? Like you can figure that one out for yourself. There's a name that is not in there. Maybe Marco's own name, I guess. I don't know. But anywho, this is very odd. Now, if you are putting this together, you can figure out what this book is. There's an identical one at the bottom of the bonfire, right? Okay, so this is a big deal that Chandrash has just found this. And guess what? He's about to get caught. The final page contains his own signature, a flourish of illegible C's carefully snipped from a piece of paper that might have been an invoice or a letter. Beneath it, there is a single lock of raven hair glued onto the page and surrounded by symbols and letters. Chandrash's hand reaches up to touch the ends of his hair curling around his collar. A shadow passes over the desk, and Chandrash jumps back in surprise. The book falls closed. Sir? Marco stands in the doorway, watching Chandrash with a curious expression. I thought you'd left for the evening, Chandrash says. He looks down at the book and then back up at Marco. I had, sir, but I forgot some of my things. Marco's eyes travel over the papers and blueprints strewn on the floor. May I ask what you're doing, sir? I might ask you the same question, Chandrash says. What is all this? He flips the book open again, the pages fluttering and settling. Those are records for the circus, Marco says, without looking at the book. What kind of records? Chandrash presses. It's a system of my own devising, Marco says. There's quite a bit to keep in order with the circus, as you know. How long have you been doing this? Doing what, sir? Keeping all this, whatever this nonsense is. He flips through the pages of the book, though he finds he does not want to touch it now. My system goes back to the inception of the circus, Marco says. Okay, want you to notice Chandrash sounds mad and offended that Marco is doing something with the circus that he hasn't shared with Chandrash, which makes sense because Chandrash is the producer of the circus. Marco, at the same time, has an edge to his voice too because he's angry that he left and Chandrash is snooping through his things. Okay, so as they have the conversation, we've seen it a few times before, like with the way that Marco treats Isabel. Now we're going to see with the way he treats Chandrash, like he does have an edge to him. He does have a cruel side. Okay, so instead of just like trying to smooth it over, what we're going to see is Marco's just going to be like straight up honest and he's going to be mean about it. Okay, so let's listen to what's going to happen. You're doing something to it, to all of us, aren't you? I am just doing my job, sir, Marco says. There is an edge to his voice now. And if I may, I do not appreciate you going through my books without informing me. Chandrash moves around the desk to face him, stepping over blueprints, stumbling, though his voice remains steady. You are my employee. I have every right to see what's in my own house, what's being done with my own projects. You're working with him, aren't you? You've been keeping all this from me this entire time. You had no right to go behind my back. Behind your back? Marco interrupts. You cannot even begin to comprehend the things that go on behind your back, that have always gone on behind your back before any of this even started. That is not what I wanted from this arrangement, Chandrash says. You never had a choice about this arrangement, Marco says. You have no control, and you never did, and you never even wanted to know how things were done. You signed receipts without so much as a glance. Money is no object, you said, nor were any of the details. Those were always left up to me. The papers on the desk ripple as Marco raises his voice, and he stops, taking a step away from the desk. The papers settle again into disheveled piles. You have been sabotaging this endeavor, Chandrash says, lying to my face, keeping God knows what in these books. What books, sir? Marco asks. Chandrash looks back at the desk. There are no papers, no pile of ledgers. There is an inkwell next to the lamp, a brass statue of an Egyptian deity, a clock, and the empty brandy bottle. Nothing else remains on the polished wood surface. Chandrash stumbles, looking from the desk to Marco and back, unable to focus. I will not let you do this to me, Chandrash says, picking up the brandy bottle from the desk and brandishing it in front of him. You are dismissed from your position. You shall leave immediately. The brandy bottle vanishes. Chandrash stops, grasping at the empty air. Cannot leave, Marco says, his voice calm and controlled. He speaks each word slowly, as though he is explaining something to a small child. I am not allowed. I must remain here, and I must continue with this nonsense, as you so aptly put it. You are going to return to your drinking and your parties, and you will not even remember that we had this conversation. Things will continue as they always have. That is what is going to happen. Chandrash opens his mouth to object and then closes it again, confused. He glances at Marco, then back at the empty desk. He looks at his hand, opening and closing his fingers, trying to grasp something that is no longer there, though he cannot remember what it was. I'm sorry, he says, turning back to Marco. I've lost my train of thought. What were we discussing? Nothing of import, sir, Marco says. Just a few minor details about the circus. Of course, Chandrash says. Where's the circus now? Sydney, Australia, sir. His voice wavers, but he covers it with a short cough before turning away. Chandrash only nods absently. May I take that for you, sir? Marco says, indicating the empty bottle that is once again sitting on the desk. Oh, Chandrash says. Yes, of course. He hands the bottle to Marco without looking at it or him, barely registering the action. May I get you another, sir? Yes, thank you, Chandrash says, wandering out of Marco's office and back into his own study. He settles into a leather armchair by the window. By the way, do you remember in 1984 where we got to the point that Winston had already been released from the Ministry of Love, and every night when he'd go to bed, a cup and a bottle would be set on his nightstand right beside where he's sleeping? This is kind of similar because Marco is going to replace his brandy bottle, and that's just like a normal thing that he's always doing, partly to keep Chandrash from being able to formulate any valid or sustainable thoughts, because he doesn't want Chandrash to question what all is happening with the circus. Okay, so you can always find similarities between the books that we've been reading in class. It's very interesting. Okay, so may I get you another, sir? Yes, thank you, Chandrash says, wandering out of Marco's office and back into his own study. He settles into a leather armchair by the window. In the office, Marco gathers up fallen notebooks and papers with trembling hands. He rolls the blueprints and piles the papers and books. He takes the silver knife he finds discarded on the floor and returns it to the dartboard in the study, stabbing the blade into the bullseye. Then he empties every drawer in the office, removes each file and document. When everything is properly organized, he locates a set of suitcases in his adjoining rooms and fills them to near to bursting, the large leather-bound book cushioned between stacks of paper. He combs through his rooms, removing every personal belonging from the space. He extinguishes the office lamps and locks the door behind him. Before he leaves for the night, arms laden with suitcases and rolls of blueprints, Marco places a full bottle of brandy and a glass on the table next to Chandrash's chair. Chandrash does not even acknowledge his presence. He stares out the window into the darkness and the rain. He does not hear the click of the door as Marco leaves. He has no shadow, Chandrash says to himself before he pours a glass of brandy. Very late in the evening, Chandrash has a rather lengthy conversation with the ghost of an old acquaintance he knew only as Prospero the Enchanter. Though that might have drifted away on thoughts that might have drifted away on waves of brandy, otherwise remain intact in his head, confirmed and secured by a diaphanous magician. Okay, so while Chandrash is in this state of drunkenness and like complete bewilderment, like his memory of their conversation is completely gone. Okay, Prospero the Enchanter comes to visit Chandrash during this time while he's all disoriented, and he plants certain ideas in Chandrash's mind. Okay, we'll find out in a couple chapters what ideas he planted into Chandrash's mind, but we can assume that it has something to do with the competition. I think that Hector is getting tired of the length of it and how there's been no progress and things like that. Okay, so he's going to like tricky lengths to try to get the competition to show in Celia's favor, or something like that. Also, I think Alexander and Hector both see that Celia and Marco are in love with each other, and they both know that they can't control that situation for very much longer. So everything's got to like come to a head here shortly, and it will, and we're going to see it in the next couple chapters. Okay, so there you go. There's today's the last of this week's reading. You now have everything you need to finish up those packets. All right, I'll see you guys soon.